There are two specific sounds in this world that I will carry with me to my grave. The first is the cold, metallic crunch of heavy upholstery shears tearing through 3 layers of delicate French silk. And the second is the suffocating, pin-drop silence that fell over 200 wedding guests, when an ultra-high-definition video of a grown man committing a cowardly crime lit up a massive 12-foot projector screen. My Uncle Richard genuinely believed he had pulled off the ultimate act of malice. He went to sleep that night convinced that when morning came, I would walk into the bridal suite, find my dream dress in ruins, collapse into hysterics, and spend my wedding day broken and humiliated in front of everyone we knew. What that arrogant, bitter man did not realize was that I was already 3 steps ahead of his twisted mind. If you have ever had to deal with a toxic, jealous family member who could not stand to see you succeed or find genuine happiness, hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and settle in, because today's story is about the kind of cold, calculated, and deeply satisfying revenge that people will be talking about for decades. To understand why a 52-year-old businessman would sneak into a dark room in the middle of the night armed with heavy shears, you have to understand the toxic hierarchy that had poisoned my family for over a decade. When I was just 16 years old, my father passed away unexpectedly from a sudden heart attack. My dad was the anchor of our family, the only person who kept everyone grounded, kind, and united. But the moment he was gone, my Uncle Richard stepped into the void, not to support a grieving widow and a teenage girl, but to establish himself as the undisputed patriarch and rule over us with arrogance. Richard was a man completely consumed by vanity, status, and the desperate need to look wealthy. He drove leased German sports cars he could barely afford the monthly payments on, he wore off-the-rack suits tailored to mimic luxury designer labels, and he made a deliberate point of treating my mother and me like pathetic charity cases whenever other relatives were watching. Every single time I worked hard and achieved a personal milestone, Richard went out of his way to diminish it. When I graduated at the very top of my class with a degree in biomedical engineering, he stood up during our family celebration dinner, raised his glass with a smirk, and loudly announced that it was adorable I was playing career woman, but I had better hurry up and find an executive husband before my biological clock ran out. Yet, the real poison in the family was not just Richard, it was his daughter, Candace. Candace was Richard's spoiled, untouchable golden child. The entire extended family was expected to revolve around her mood swings, her demands, and her endless dramas. If Candace bought a new sedan, my reliable little hatchback was ridiculed as an embarrassing eyesore. If Candace went on an overseas resort vacation, my weekend camping trips were mocked as peasant behavior. For years, I swallowed every insult and kept my mouth shut simply to protect my mother from endless family conflict. Then, Julian entered my life. Julian is kind, brilliant, fiercely loyal, and runs a highly successful renewable energy logistics enterprise. When Julian and I announced our engagement, the balance of power inside our family shifted instantly and violently. Julian and I had spent years working grueling hours, investing wisely, and living below our means, which allowed us to fully fund our dream wedding entirely on our own terms. We booked a breathtaking private coastal manor in Northern California, sitting right on the cliffs overlooking the vast Pacific Ocean. The moment Richard heard about the venue, his face contorted into pure, unfiltered jealousy. Every time an aunt or cousin praised our choice of location, you could visibly see his jaw muscles twitching with rage. However, the real breaking point arrived 6 months before the wedding day, when Candace's fiancé abruptly called off their lavish, over-the-top engagement. He had discovered through private messages that Candace had been having an affair with his primary business partner behind his back. In the blink of an eye, the golden child's life collapsed into absolute disgrace, and Richard's fragile family ego was shattered into pieces. Instead of holding his daughter accountable or dealing with their own private disaster, Richard focused all his bitter, poisonous resentment directly at me. He simply could not stomach the reality that his daughter was sitting alone in humiliation, while I was preparing to walk into a beautiful marriage with the love of my life. 3 months before the wedding, my mother and I visited a renowned bridal boutique in San Francisco to pick out the dress. It was not just an ordinary gown, it was a handcrafted masterpiece. Delicate French lace bodice, hand-stitched pearl beadwork, a flowing cathedral train, and rare vintage silk that was dyed to perfectly match the heirloom veil my late father had given to my mother on their own wedding day. The gown cost nearly $12,000. It was a major investment, but the second I put it on, I felt a deep, overwhelming peace, almost as though my father's arms were wrapped around my shoulders, giving me his blessing. When a few private behind-the-scenes fitting photos accidentally surfaced on social media, Candace threw a violent fit at home, claiming that I was deliberately flaunting my happiness to torture her while she was suffering. Richard actually had the audacity to call my mother late that evening, screaming so loudly through the phone that I could hear every single word across the kitchen. He shrieked that I was an insensitive, selfish brat, that Candace was battling clinical depression while I was wasting thousands of dollars on pure vanity. He demanded that I cancel the designer order, wear a plain, modest dress, and stop embarrassing the family by gloating. My mother, who had spent over a decade shrinking back and appeasing her brother, finally drew a line. She did not scream, she did not argue, she simply pressed the red button and hung up on him. From that exact moment, Richard's passive-aggressive remarks escalated into open, hostile malice. At our rehearsal dinner, hosted at the estate the evening before the ceremony, Richard showed up over an hour late, heavily intoxicated on expensive scotch. He refused to acknowledge Julian, made crude remarks about the catering staff, and loudly announced to my bridesmaids that expensive weddings always end in bitter divorces within 24 months. I stayed calm on the outside, but my instincts were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. Around 9 o'clock that night, after the dinner concluded and the guests began heading to their cabins, I walked up to the second floor of the main manor house to check on the bridal suite. Richard was standing alone by the dark landing at the top of the stairs, leaning against the banister. His eyes were fixed intently on the wooden door of my suite. As I walked past him, he narrowed his eyes and muttered in a low, gravelly voice, that I had built myself quite a little fortress up there. He said it must be nice to have the universe hand everything to me on a silver platter, but life has a funny way of balancing the scales when people least expect it. I stopped dead in my tracks, turned around, and looked right into his bloodshot eyes. I asked him flatly what he meant by that. He gave me a disturbing, dead-eyed grin and said that I should just enjoy the show while it lasted. A freezing chill ran down my spine. A normal person might have brushed it off as the bitter ramblings of an angry drunk. But I had known Richard my entire life. This was the same vindictive man who, years ago, had intentionally driven his heavy pickup truck through a neighbor's prize-winning garden in the dead of night, simply because the neighbor asked him not to block the shared driveway. He was petty, he was malicious, and he genuinely believed he was smarter than everyone else. I walked inside the bridal suite, locked the heavy deadbolt, and stood in front of the wardrobe where my $12,000 silk gown was hanging. My hands were trembling with adrenaline. My gut was telling me with absolute certainty that Richard had something dark planned for that room. 2 weeks earlier, I had bought a cheap, white lace practice dress from an online discount outlet for $80 to use while rehearsing our complex first dance choreography. From across the room, it shared the exact same A-line silhouette, white fabric, and scalloped lace hemline as my custom gown, though it was made of synthetic polyester. I immediately texted Julian to come up to the suite through the private back staircase. I told him everything Richard had said on the landing. Julian did not doubt me for a single second, he trusted my judgment completely. Working together in silence, we carefully unzipped my genuine designer gown, placed it inside a heavy-duty, climate-controlled garment carrier, and carried it through the private estate gardens to the estate manager's locked private cottage. We secured it inside the master fireproof safe and locked the heavy metal door. Then, we took the $80 polyester practice dress, hung it inside the designer boutique garment bag on the wardrobe, and left the zipper pulled down just enough so the white lace and bodice were visibly exposed. Next came the trap. Julian's company routinely deployed high-end commercial surveillance equipment for corporate facilities. In his travel gear, he had two ultra-compact, magnetic 4K night vision cameras that linked directly to an off-site, encrypted cloud server with instant cellular backup. We concealed the first wide-angle lens deep inside the foliage of a large artificial ficus plant sitting across from the wardrobe, pointing directly at the dress. We mounted the second camera high along the wooden trim above the window, providing an unobstructed panoramic view of the entire room, the wardrobe, and the entrance door. I activated the motion sensors, linked the live stream directly to my smartphone, and made sure the push notifications were set to high priority. By 11:30 that night, the manor estate had fallen completely dark. The catering crew had left, the wedding party had retired to the guest wing, and I lay awake in bed next to my maid of honor, staring at the ceiling and waiting for the silence to break. At exactly 2:14 in the morning, my phone vibrated sharply against my palm. The screen lit up with a single alert. Motion detected, bridal suite. My heart began pounding against my ribs with such force that I could hear my pulse roaring in my ears. I tapped the notification and opened the live feed. The screen displayed a crisp, high-definition night vision stream as the brass door handle slowly turned and the heavy wooden door clicked open. A dark figure slipped inside, illuminating the floor with the narrow beam of a smartphone flashlight. It was Uncle Richard. He was not staggering. He was not stumbling around like a drunken fool. His movements were precise, quiet, and completely deliberate. He was wearing thick black leatherwork gloves, and in his right hand, he was gripping a massive, 8-inch pair of heavy industrial tailoring shears. I sat up in bed, completely paralyzed by what I was watching through the camera lens. Richard walked straight toward the wardrobe. He reached out, yanked down the garment bag, and sneered as he saw the white lace. He did not inspect the tag, he did not check the seams. He simply saw a white wedding gown and unleashed pure, unadulterated venom. He drove the heavy steel blades right into the center of the bodice. The sickening sound of the metal teeth chewing through the fabric echoed through my phone speaker with brutal clarity. He did not just make a simple cut, he completely butchered the dress. He hacked off the shoulder straps, he sliced the skirt into jagged, dangling ribbons, he slashed through the waistline over and over again, tearing the polyester apart with wild, frantic swings. He spent 4 full minutes venting years of bitter, festering hatred on that piece of cloth. Sweat was glistening on his forehead, and his mouth was twisted into a grotesque, triumphant grin. When he finally finished destroying it, he gathered the shredded scraps of fabric into a tight bundle, shoved the mutilated dress into a heavy black contractor garbage bag he pulled from inside his coat, and tied it shut. He used the sleeve of his jacket to wipe down the brass doorknob to erase any fingerprints, turned off his flashlight, and quietly vanished down the dark hallway. I sat in the dark bedroom, trembling from head to toe, tears of pure shock spilling down my cheeks. If my real wedding dress had been hanging in that room, my entire morning would have been an absolute nightmare. I would have walked into that suite to find the symbol of my father's memory and my hard work chopped to pieces. Richard had fully intended to destroy my spirit and force me to walk down the aisle in tears, wearing a borrowed dress, looking broken in front of everyone I loved. My maid of honor woke up, looked at the recording on my screen, and gasped in absolute fury. She grabbed her phone and insisted we call the county sheriff right that second to have him arrested before dawn. I caught her wrist, looked her in the eyes, and told her no. I explained that if the police arrested him quietly at 4 in the morning, he would post bail within hours, and our wedding ceremony would become a sad, whispered event where all the guests felt pity for us. She looked at me in disbelief and asked what I planned to do instead. I stared at the saved 20-gigabyte video file sitting on my phone's storage, crystal clear, indisputable, 4K evidence. I told her that I was going to let him attend the wedding, and I was going to give him the grand, unforgettable spotlight he had always craved. The following morning at 8 o'clock, the wedding party gathered in the main dining hall for breakfast. Uncle Richard was sitting at a corner table, sipping his black coffee, reading the morning paper, looking more relaxed and content than I had seen him in 10 years. His eyes kept flicking toward the grand staircase, eagerly waiting for the screams of horror and the sound of a bride breaking down in tears. Instead, I walked down the staircase wearing my silk robe, laughing and chatting happily with my bridesmaids. When Richard saw me smiling and glowing with energy, his coffee mug froze halfway to his mouth. A sudden look of utter bewilderment and panic crossed his face. He had expected to see an emotional wreck, not a radiant bride looking completely untroubled. I walked right past his table, looked down at him, and cheerfully wished him a wonderful morning. He swallowed hard, stammered through a nervous greeting, and awkwardly asked if everything was on schedule for the afternoon ceremony. I looked him straight in the eyes, smiled warmly, and told him that everything was under complete control, and that today was going to be an unforgettable day for our entire family. He spent the rest of the morning nervously pacing the outer stone courtyard, frantically checking his watch every 5 minutes, completely unable to comprehend why the emotional bomb he thought he had planted had failed to go off. Meanwhile, Julian and I walked down to the reception pavilion to meet with Leo, the lead audiovisual technician running the sound system and the massive LED wall. Julian pulled a high-speed flash drive from his pocket and handed it directly to Leo. Julian explained to him that at the conclusion of the family speeches, right before the scheduled memorial tribute to my father, he was supposed to play the romantic childhood slideshow. Leo nodded and confirmed the schedule. I looked at Leo and told him to replace the slideshow with the video file on the drive. I instructed him to turn the sound system up to full volume and told him that no matter who screamed, cursed, or demanded he shut it down, he was not to stop that video until the screen went completely black. Leo opened the file on his editing laptop, played the first 20 seconds, and his jaw dropped in utter disbelief. He looked up at Julian and me with wide eyes and promised us that the video would play without interruption. When the ceremony began that afternoon, it was absolute magic. The pavilion doors opened, and I walked down the long, flower-lined aisle wearing my untouched, stunning, $12,000 French silk gown. The gasps of admiration from the guests echoed across the room. As I walked past the third row on the bride's side, my eyes locked onto Uncle Richard. The color instantly drained from his face until he was as pale as a corpse. His eyes bugged out as he stared at my intricate lace bodice and flowing train, looking as though he had just witnessed a ghost rise from an open grave. His mind was visibly short-circuiting. He could not fathom how the shredded scraps of cloth sitting in the dumpster behind the estate had magically reassembled themselves into flawless perfection. I gave him a subtle, knowing smirk and continued walking toward Julian. We exchanged our vows, placed the rings on our fingers, and sealed our marriage with a kiss. By 7:30 that evening, the reception pavilion was alive with music, laughter, and celebration. 200 guests were seated around long dark wood tables decorated with glowing candles and white floral arrangements. As the dinner plates were being cleared by the staff, the master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone. He announced to the room that before the dance floor was opened, Julian and Clara had prepared a very special visual presentation to honor a family member whose true actions had shaped this unforgettable day. The ambient overhead chandeliers slowly dimmed. The massive 12-foot LED wall behind the main head table hummed and glowed to life. Uncle Richard was sitting at the front row VIP table, right between my mother and his corporate associates, leisurely swirling a fresh glass of vintage champagne. The screen flickered. There was no soft, emotional piano music. There were no cute childhood pictures of me playing in the backyard. Instead, the screen blared with bold, bright red timecode characters, 2:14 and 8 seconds AM bridal suite security feed. The heavy arena speakers boomed with the distinct sound of a door handle slowly turning. The entire room went completely dead silent. On the screen, rendered in razor-sharp 4K resolution, Uncle Richard stepped into the dark room wearing his black leather gloves and holding the massive tailoring shears. A sharp, collective gasp ripped across the entire reception hall. Aunt Sarah leaned forward, gripped the table, and whispered in horror, asking what on earth we were watching. The lighting in the video was so clear that you could see every single line of malicious joy etched into Richard's face. You could hear the heavy, raspy sound of his breathing over the high-grade microphones. Then came the shears. Crunch. Rip. Snap. The brutal sound of the steel blades chewing through the white dress echoed through the pavilion speakers like gunshots. 200 people watched in complete shock as Richard slashed the bodice to ribbons, chopped the train into jagged rags, and stuffed the mangled remains into the black trash bag. The silence in that hall was heavier than a tomb. It was the sound of an entire room of friends, colleagues, and family members realizing simultaneously that they were looking at a vicious, calculating monster. My mother pressed both hands over her mouth, tears of pure horror streaming down her face. Richard's business associates, his lifelong friends, his cousins, every single person turned their heads away from the screen and locked their eyes directly onto the VIP table. Richard sat frozen in his chair, completely paralyzed. The glass of champagne in his hand was shaking so violently that liquid was splashing over his knuckles and onto the white tablecloth. His pale skin flushed into a dark, suffocating purple. The video reached its final moments. On the screen, Richard wiped down the doorknob, turned around, and looked straight into the hidden lens of the plant camera for 3 continuous seconds, displaying his unmistakable, sneering face in full close-up before walking out. The screen went pitch black. Instantly, the overhead chandeliers blazed back to life at full brightness. 200 pairs of furious eyes bore straight into Richard. My mother slowly stood up, looked at her brother across the table, and with a voice shaking with grief and rage, asked him how he could possibly be so evil. Richard leaped out of his seat in a blind panic, knocking his heavy wooden chair backward onto the hardwood floor with a deafening crash. He began waving his arms wildly, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek, screaming that the video was a deep fake, that it was artificial intelligence, that I was framing him because I hated him, that I had staged the entire thing to ruin his reputation. I calmly picked up the wireless microphone from our table, stood up, and looked at him across the room with a voice as steady as steel. I told him that the local county deputies were already waiting outside the main entrance. I informed everyone in the room that the black contractor bag containing the destroyed $80 practice dress, along with his heavy tailoring shears and his fresh fingerprints, was currently sitting in the dumpster behind the catering kitchen right where he had tossed it. Richard's mouth hung open, but no words came out. He looked wildly around the room, searching desperately for anyone to stand up for him. He looked at his business partner, who looked away in absolute disgust. He looked at his sister, who turned her back on him completely. There were no excuses left. There was no lie big enough to save him. Without another word, he stumbled over his own feet, shoved past the catering station, and sprinted out the side exit into the night. 2 sheriff's deputies were waiting by his car in the parking lot. In full view of the valets, the drivers, and the estate staff, Richard was pushed against the hood of his car, handcuffed, and placed under arrest for felony vandalism, criminal trespassing, and grand larceny. As the heavy side doors closed behind him, the entire reception pavilion erupted into thunderous applause and cheers. Julian stepped up, took the microphone with a broad smile, and announced to the crowd that now that the trash had been officially taken care of, it was time to celebrate. The DJ dropped a heavy bass line, the lights shifted to vibrant colors, and for the rest of the night, we danced, laughed, and celebrated our new life surrounded only by the people who genuinely loved and respected us. Richard eventually accepted a harsh plea deal to avoid prison time, paying massive restitution fines, completing 200 hours of community service, and accepting a permanent restraining order. But his real punishment was not handed down by a judge. It was the absolute destruction of the wealthy, respectable image he had spent 50 years fabricating. He was completely cut off by the family, dropped by his business clients, and will forever be known as the pathetic man who brought a pair of scissors to a wedding. Justice does not always require screaming matches or bitter arguments. Sometimes, the most powerful way to defeat someone with evil intentions is to simply hand them the shears, turn on the high-definition cameras, and let them destroy themselves in front of the entire world. If this story gave you that deeply satisfying feeling of true karma taking place, smash that like button right now. Leave a comment below telling me what you would have done if you caught a relative doing this to your special day, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss another unbelievable story of ultimate revenge.